really pleased you were able to join us today. Now, I'm sure many of you know that for over a decade I've been talking and writing about campus kangaroo courts, the appalling, unjust processes that are being used on campuses, both in Australia and in America and many other countries, actually, to investigate and adjudicate sexual misconduct. And I've been contacted by many students and their parents who are dealing with these courts in Australia. I never know quite how to begin to help them. It's very frustrating. So I was really excited to hear about an organisation called Families Advocating for Campus Equality, FACE it's called, which provides support and advocacy for students facing and staff who are facing this sort of ordeal in American universities. And I'm delighted today I have with me a lawyer, a lawyer named Cynthia Garrett, who's co-president of FACE. I always get confused whether I'm allowed to call them lawyers or not in America. Hello, Cynthia.
Doesn't matter. You can call me a lawyer, attorney, whatever you feel comfortable with. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored that you contacted me to have this conversation.
I'm very pleased to discover you and to learn about your work. I've spent a lot of time. FACE has a terrific website. Everyone should go and have a look. We'll put up details of that. Website with all sorts of information to help people in these circumstances. But Cynthia, you got involved because a friend of yours was facing this sort of ordeal.
I spoke to somebody who was going through this, and my first reaction was, well, that can't be. That doesn't even make sense. Mm-hmm. So I started to, and I just assumed they misunderstood. So I started to look into it, and I was shocked. Yeah. I kept saying, you can't do that. This is America. You can't do that in America. But yeah, it was like a mantra in my back of my head going over, no, you can't do that. Both my husband and I are lawyers, and we were just flabbergasted.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, which most people are when they discover what's going on here. But the organisation actually was started in 2013 by two mothers who were dealing with this. Can you tell me a bit about them and how that developed?
They lived in different places across the country. Their sons went to different colleges or universities, and they just happened to connect with each other at one point, and then a second and a third parent from different states joined them, and they realized that more and more people were contacting them, and perhaps they needed to set up something where all the people could be brought together. It's hugely reparative to talk to other people who've gone through the craziness. We call it a nightmare, because other people just don't understand. You think my son would never do that, and you're right. Your son probably wouldn't do that, but it doesn't matter. Even though they believe they're good and they would never do any such thing, to be accused of it without having done it, it's vile. I mean, your whole self-esteem, that other people would believe it. So you really need to talk to other people who understand that craziness.
Yeah, and what's that's like. And just at this point, I thought I might talk about that issue of what would they be accused of. And of course, you might have some people there who are getting involved with the organisation where he has done something that's really wrong. But you know, you never really know until you delve into the details there. But what I've found is the accusations are often about the sort of behaviour that most of us have got involved in. We're not talking about jumping on a woman and raping her. We're talking about normal, messy human sexual interaction. You know, we're talking about drunken hookups. We're talking about going to bed with someone and you don't know whether you want the relationship to continue. You know, you're not communicating very well. You thought it went okay, but all of that stuff, he said, she said stuff, where what's going on in your head but maybe very different from what's going on in his head. And these are the usual accusations, aren't they? That messy stuff, often with a lot of alcohol involved, which has nothing to do with what most people think of as rape.
Well, no, because they mesh the terms together. I mean, they call it sexual assault, and it's crazy what they're defining as sexual assault.
Yeah.
you're right. A lot of it involves alcohol. I think it's 80% of the cases involve alcohol
Yeah.
of one or both parties. Half of these kids have been blacked out drunk. And, that's
Yeah.
another layer of confusion because you could appear to be completely normal when you're blacked
Yeah.
out. But of
Yeah.
course, the young woman goes to the office and says, I don't remember anything. And the office says, oh, you must have been, incapacitated. And, there you are, it's over. And the kid is expelled.
Yeah.
So, but we also run into cases where somebody's failing an exam and says to the teacher, well, I had an experience, and the teacher probes and, and outcomes. Well, I didn't really want to have sex with this guy. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Especially if she ends up going to the Title IX office. Well, that sounds like an assault. I mean,
Yeah.
some of these girls didn't think it was an assault, as you know, even from the studies. They
Yeah.
didn't think it was an assault. Yet, of course, these feminist scholars and gender activists still interpret it as an assault.
Well,
Um,
anything's an assault where a woman has been drinking, and they don't ever define how much she's been drinking.
mm,
But that's what across both our countries students are being taught, that whenever a woman has had anything to drink, she's not capable of giving consent, and therefore it is sexual assault, which is all just
well, yeah,
madness, isn't it?
because I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I thought we drank to loosen up to have sex. I mean, I thought that was the thing.
I know. Well, it was the thing, and it's always been, and it still is the thing.
Yeah.
Girls deliberately decide. I mean, I've done research on this years ago, gone out and talked to people about, do you ever get drunk because you don't want to make a decision whether to have sex or not? You're with a guy and it's all too confusing. It's easy to get drunk and get carried away and let it all happen. And women will cheerfully acknowledge they've done that.
Hmm.
But of course, all of that's been now rewritten and reinterpreted in the light of the new feminist narrative, and that's what's really scary. I was talking to a mother the other day whose son went to bed. She was drunk, he was drunk. The girl thought she was having sex with someone else and admitted that the
Oh,
next morning. She woke up with the wrong guy, and she still charged him with sexual assault, and it's now going into a criminal case. I mean,
criminal?
just criminal. Outside, it started off at a university setting. Now it's gone to the police and the courts. He's very vulnerable. I mean, this
That
is where we
scares
are
me.
now. Yeah, it is frightening.
Because I don't know about you, but we have these DAs, district attorneys, and prosecutors who want to make a name for themselves now. And so they
Mhm.
go after these kids with ridiculous. We had a kid that was being criminally prosecuted for an alleged butt grab and a kiss. And the story
Yeah,
was she ran up to him, grabbed him, kissed him, he kissed her back, and that was the end of it. It was his ex-girlfriend. And then months later, he gets this text, why did you kiss me and grab my butt when I didn't want you to? And he
yeah,
responded, this was the detective getting him to text. And he responded, he said, I only kissed you back and I didn't, you know, grab your butt. And then the prosecutor offers him a sentence with a full life sex offender registry.
oh,
And they were
I know.
coercing him, even his own attorney. Finally, they got a new attorney, and the new attorney was very good. But his own attorney was coercing him into taking this plea deal that is
Yeah,
absurd. I mean,
and
these are
there's
kids.
but it's another issue altogether. But the
Yeah,
sex registry, people,
which is
there's a big push, and everyone jumps on board saying how wonderful. Yes, we have to keep an eye on these horrible pederasts all their lives, and they don't realise some of these kids can end up on that registry for life
they
as
do.
a
There's
result of this. Yeah,
thousands of kids on these lists. And,
I know.
people think it's useful. It's not useful anymore because you've got 100 people within a mile who are on this stupid registry. I mean, I'm just guessing. And
Yeah,
you don't know which ones are actually dangerous.
I know. I know.
I mean, how much help is that?
How much? Yeah. So you've had over 2,000 parents, you estimate, coming to you for help with these issues.
Yes, we've been contacted by over 2,000,
Yeah.
and certain amount, stay active for a while where they connect with other parents and the students connect with other students. And then many move on. Some stay to continue to help and support
Yeah.
other parents. They give each other really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I'm involved with I've helping or getting a group together of women who've contacted me, mothers, not just mothers of sons who've going through campus ordeals like this, but also mothers whose sons are, facing battles in the family court and facing issues with, alleged violence, which actually didn't occur, and a whole range of workplace discrimination, Me Too accusations. And it's the same thing. The idea is for parents to give each other support, and for the mothers to tell the stories of what's happening to their sons. That's very powerful. On your Face website, you've got a whole bunch of stories from the parents talking about what happened to their sons. It's very illuminating. I think people should have a good look at that, because they really show the range of situations and the sort of issues you're raising, Cynthia, how easily these boys can, particularly usually boys, of course, can be conned into doing things that are really bad for them by the people conducting these investigations, making statements that they shouldn't say,
Well, yeah, they want to interrogate
yeah.
them before
Yeah.
telling them even what they're accused of. I mean,
That's
what
right.
would happen if you were in school and the dean said, I need you to come in for a conversation? Never would you suspect. These kids don't suspect. They don't have any guilt feelings because it isn't even in their wheelhouse that they've done anything wrong.
And often haven't, of course. I mean, that's the point. That's the point. And so they go in, and very hard for a kid to think, I mustn't go in. I'm going to say no. I'm not going to go. I'm going to tell him I'm not going without a lawyer. I mean, people don't think like that, do they?
No, because they love their school. They're loyal to their school. They believe that loyalty is reciprocated, and their school will find the truth and take care of them. And first of all, they don't even know what it's about. So they go in there, and then they're, told, well, this sexual misconduct, and their mind is going, and they're panicking, and they're thinking, what? How could that be?
Yeah. I mean, some of the kids' parents I've talked to, and the students, they don't know what they're talking about when they're first approached, and they have to. I mean, some of these kids have a pretty lively social life, and they have various sexual events with and to even work out who in the hell, what are they talking about? When did this happen?
Right.
I mean, it's genuine. This disbelief.
And months later, or a year later, or 2 years later. I mean, there's no time limit on when these can be filed.
Yeah. And often, I assume you find often the students won't tell their parents. I mean, that's one of the things I found.
That's a problem.
Go into shock. I mean, one of them I was talking to, he just, they threw him immediately out of the college at the first when the first allegation surfaced. And he just went and sort of hid out in the house of some distant relative and didn't tell his parents at all. And he just hid under a bed, sleeping for days and days and days. He just didn't know how to begin to deal with it, didn't tell anybody. And it was quite a few weeks before he even told his parents. I assume that's something you find too.
We've had parents get the first call from the psychiatric ward of a hospital.
Oh my God.
Because of course, they've had suicidal thoughts or they've attempted suicide. We've had schools drop kids off with nothing off campus somewhere, hundreds of miles from home.
Wow.
I mean, these kids are taught that they do the right thing, and you're an adult now, you have to deal with these problems, and they don't want to call mommy and daddy as soon as there's an accusation because they think they should handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've told them.
I mean, you have a slightly different system. A lot of Australian students still live with their parents during going to university. We have the bulk of, I think it's probably true, the bulk of students, local students, live at home. So, and there's not the same, pushing out the door.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real life stage, isn't it? When you leave home to go to university, go to college in America. And then, as you say, there's an expectation you're going to be independent then, which makes it very hard for them to crawl home and say, hey, Mum, this has happened.
Right, and crawl, because not only that, it's embarrassing. And they, they worry that their parents are going to think, that somehow they did something wrong. And honestly, I have 2 daughters. Before I heard of this, I would have assumed any woman that made an accusation, there was some truth to it. I just would have made that assumption.
Yeah.
I don't anymore.
No.
There's all kinds of motivations. We've had parents find out they had sex and, Mormon, Muslim, and Christian. And then all of a sudden there was an allegation.
Yeah.
We've had, boyfriends find out their girlfriend was unfaithful, and there's these scenarios that repeat, and then of course the iconic drunken hookup that repeat themselves over and over and over again. And that's how we know that they're likely true. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't some cases where the student could have been more attentive, sympathetic, could have listened, but I don't think we have any rapists.
Yeah. I mean, because a lot of them revolve around consent and the whole business of and the big pressure, which isn't such a bad thing. This idea of teaching men to check and to ask and to make sure she's, but it's very normal sex doesn't operate like that. Marital sex doesn't operate like that. You don't. Your husband doesn't say, "Can I kiss you every time?" Which we're being told we must do. So these enthusiastic consent laws are making most sex illegal, and yet, I mean, I think at its heart there's a sensible idea there of teaching males, particularly, to be very alert to signs that she's not into it. She's worried about whatever, and to talk about it and to ask about it. And that makes sense. But the idea that it's all on the male shoulders, that everything that happens is his fault unless he's got verbal consent, enthusiastic consent.
Enthusiastic, I know, I love that.
Every inch of the way. I mean, it's a nonsense. Life doesn't operate like that. Yeah,
I agree with you, because it treats women like they have no agency. I mean, what the hell? If I'd been approached by a guy who wanted to have sex, I would have just said no, or I would have walked out the room. Now, I'm not talking about, criminal assaults, nothing like that. I understand that happens. I'm not doubting it. But, there's no way I would have said this whole non-consent consent thing, where the girl lies there because she doesn't want to disappoint the guy, or maybe he'll date her or whatever. No, I might have done that once or twice, but it never occurred to me to blame somebody else.
Yeah.
It was a stupid decision.
Well, but it's this is, of course, one of the most disappointing things ever about the feminist movement. This idea, which I grew up with, it was about women having agency for their lives and taking responsibility and acting like, being alongside men, acting like adults, to this victimization, this notion that we are incapable of looking after ourselves, and we need laws and authorities and to constantly protect us. It's been the most peculiar shift, hasn't it?
It really is. It's embarrassing. When I talk to friends my age, we talk about how embarrassing it is. Because here we worked so hard, to be successful professionals. I went to law school. There weren't, we were a minority, not a huge minority, but still a minority. I worked at a big firm where we were a minority. We had like one woman partner who was very aggressive, male-like, who wasn't actually my role model, because I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. But and the guys went out to play tennis with each other. I mean, it was a men's club that we joined, but it never occurred to me to complain about, comments they made, or I just brushed it off and walked away.
Well, there too, obviously there are men who behave appallingly, and women who can harass people who are working for them or whatever. But so some of that has been good, but a lot of it has been just shocking in the impact it's had. And one of the biggest impacts in the workplace is going to be men not wanting to mentor women. I mean, what man in his right mind would want to spend time, alone with a young woman, helping her, giving her special attention, even if she was really brilliant? I mean, anyway, we're straying a bit off track here. I want to go back. I'm sure we could have a fascinating conversation. About all this. And now, just going back to, I was just intrigued that you on the website you have many examples talking about the way the system, your tribunal system, is stacked against the accused, and there's a particular section on giving advice from parents, which says things like, expect your student may be suspended or expelled, expect an unsympathetic campus environment, expect your student will be given few rights. I mean, it's just chilling reading all this stuff. That the idea that the system is stacked against your son is such a shock for parents, isn't it?
Well, I do have to say, not every school. We haven't
No.
heard from every school. There are other schools, however, that we've heard from over and over again.
Yeah.
It's a funny story. One of the moms and I tried to post, we both live in California, and we tried to post, her son had been through a case where there was actually a text where the girl says, "Come to my room and bring a condom." And they were both drunk. And in the end, he gets expelled and there was a lawsuit, and it was a horrible story. But anyway, so she blew up that text conversation, and we did a sign and basically said, "This could be you."
Wow.
Or whatever we did. We went around the UC campus and the state California campus and put these posters all over. I'm sure they didn't last very long, but we handed them to some students who were very shocked. And my goal has been to get our goal has been to get some campus referral for us as how many victims advocates organizations does every single school list, and how many advocacy organizations do they list for men?
Yeah,
I've heard of a couple that have listed us, but it's, rare. We can't
No,
even get an ad in their paper.
Yeah, and they rip them down. I mean, of course, I know you know about my recent history, Cynthia, going out on campuses doing that sort of stuff. We last year distributed thousands and thousands of brochures, little flyers under the doors of one of our major colleges at Sydney University, telling them what's happening, telling them what the laws are saying at their university, telling them about the regulations that say nothing about fair treatment for the accused and are all about believe the victim justice. And so I've distributed all of that, and I've spent hours on campuses handing out those sort of leaflets, and most people haven't a clue. Staff are shocked. University lecturers are shocked that this is happening because, of course, it is extremely hard to get proper publicity for what's going on here, and that's what's got me into enormous trouble speaking out about this. And people, the feminist advocates will do anything to destroy someone who's speaking out about this, which is what they did to me.
No, they don't have any compunction at all about just trashing people. That's how they operate. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think staff and professors especially are beginning. I mean, they definitely know, unless their orientation is toward gender studies, they definitely know what's happening, because we're getting more and more professors contacting us as well.
Yeah.
I mean, brilliant professors.
Yeah, I had a professor contact me a student had said something to him, and he said, contact me. He said, "I don't know what to do to help this kid." And at least we could start to find some means of supporting him. But it's really good that they at least know I'm still there as someone who's trying to, and I've got lawyers who can help if necessary. Now you've got obviously as a lawyer yourself, you've got a group of people who can help parents of students, who are dealing with all of this.
Well, we have lawyers, but they cost money. And our problem has always been getting help for most of the kids that can't afford lawyers, which is hugely socioeconomic, and which includes minorities. Now, we don't have any data that says minorities are particularly targeted, but we do have a lot of Black students and Mexican students. And I think part of that is socioeconomic.
Yeah, I found some data once, or I don't know how anecdotal it was, suggesting that students who are slightly out of the mainstream, as you say, Asian students from overseas, won't necessarily get the social cues, are more vulnerable to being accused of inappropriate behavior because they don't necessarily read the signals in the right way. And I think there's something in that. I mean, there's this real, funnily enough, Black Lives Matter issue here, just in terms of, people who are outside the mainstream social group are vulnerable. And yet, of course, no one wants to talk about that either, do they?
No, and some of it is our cultural assumptions, like Muslim students. They assume that because the student is Muslim or Iranian or whatever, that they
Yeah.
did do what they're accused of.
Yeah.
Because in your culture, I mean, we've actually had police make a comment like that. Well, your culture, that's how you treat women, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really pretty shocking.
Yeah. 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 But so talking about the lawyers, you do. I mean, there's a fantastic little brochure you've got put up by some of the lawyers who work with you, giving legal advice on your website, which I really advise people to have a good look at. And fascinating stuff in there, just in terms of what you're suggesting, like. Yeah, I mean, that students have to get help really quickly because if as well, tell me how that is. I mean, as if they don't act quickly, they're going to lose some of the vital information that might help them protect
Hmm.
themselves. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which is, I
And
mean,
we do.
yeah, sorry, I was just going to say the other part in there. I mean, collecting all the electronic communication, the text messages, the emails, that not only the ones that they've sent, but the ones that their friends might have, which can help piece together the sequence of events. And I mean, some of that was chilling. That if you don't gather that quickly, the risk is the other side will destroy it.
Yeah, in some cases have turned that Brandeis, I think it was Brandeis or Amherst case turned on that. I can't
Yeah,
remember if it was, I should know which one it was, but
doesn't matter.
the one about the girl who gave the guy oral sex and he was passed out, but then
Yeah,
later she filed the claim against him and the school assumed he was guilty. And, I don't know how you force somebody to give you oral sex, but whatever. Um,
yeah,
and I think he was expelled, and
yeah,
then he had the money to file a lawsuit, and eventually the text came out that very night that girl who was his girlfriend's roommate said, well, I hope he's too drunk to remember what happened, and immediately called some other guy to her room to have more sex. And
yeah,
that's what saved him.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I had the very first case I got involved with here in Australia, which was at Adelaide University. A student contacted me through a friend, saying he'd been approached by a committee, and that was so rare to get someone contact you before they actually meet with the university at all, and that was what saved him, because I immediately got a lawyer pro bono to help give him advice, and who told him, don't go near the committee. I'll help you write a letter to the university saying that they have no right to require you to attend this meeting. And we then, so we went in this long battle on his behalf. Also, people like me writing to the university saying, what are you doing here? And it was interesting because this is really early days in this whole procedure. And in the end, the university caved. They had a general counsel, the university's main lawyer, then came scuttling in and told him, "Oh, we have to protect your due process rights." And of course you can see, yeah, of course you
Yeah.
can see. But what was interesting in that case is it was classic because he has still had all the social media evidence of what had happened, all her text messages to him showing she was the one who'd invited him into her room that night, and the girl was alleging it was all the other way, and a whole lot of stuff which contradicted her evidence. And in the end, the university just pulled away, backed out. But that's because we were in from the beginning. And I gather from a lot of your cases, you're only seeing people once they've been thrown out of university. That process is already well down the track. Is that right?
Well, we're starting, I mean, over the last couple of years, we have had people find us as soon as the accusation is made.
Yeah.
And so the parents come in, and if they can afford a lawyer, we have a list, and some other parent says, well, this lawyer worked really well for me. So we do have that. But yeah, unfortunately, the pro bono services, lawyers can only do so much. I mean,
Yeah.
we have some lawyers that are so giving that literally they need to make more money
Yeah. I
because
know.
they're so generous with their time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's, all the lawyers I have helping me on. I've got lawyers helping me with. We're preparing information about what's happening in various universities with regard to their regulations. We're exposing that. All these people are doing it for nothing, which is very heartening. But they're also most of them are too nervous to be named. I mean, even if they're a retired partner in a major law firm,
Yeah.
they're worried about their name if they're seen to be associated with me or seen to be associated with this process. We've had judges, we've got all sorts of people helping me, but they're all having to be very careful about it, which says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. In fact, FIRE's done a lot of good work.
Yeah.
And I
Why
was
what can you remember what that stands for?
Foundation of Individual Rights and Education.
Yeah, I mean there are a number of key organisations working in this space, exposing what's happening on campuses in America. And unfortunately, we don't have anyone other than me just about in Australia. But
and they're doing great
go
job on due process. They originally were more free speech, but Samantha Harris is one of the people there that is just doing an amazing job. But even in one of our founders' cases where the student had been expelled and then the girl had filed a police report, and the police decided it was a false report and issued an arrest warrant for her. She left the state, and it wasn't until like a year later that FIRE contacted. Well, they may have contacted before then, but they didn't get any results for at least a year, where they finally retracted the guilty finding. Hello.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, it's interesting because from what I gather, in America, a lot of the cases, there are significant numbers of parents, families suing after the event. So the student is thrown out of university, is expelled, is suspended, and then you go to I don't know which court system for redress.
It can be state or federal. I think most of them go to federal, but we don't know because not all states have adequate databases. But there's a rule that you have to finish the process.
Yeah.
You can't just jump from, unless there's a process like there is in California called a writ process, where you can actually go to a court to have the action stayed.
So to stay the investigation of the at the college,
or the hearing or whatever,
whatever it is.
But usually the rule is you have to exhaust your administrative remedies, which would be the remedies of the college process.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we've got. I mean, that's one of the things we're looking at the moment here in Australia, because most people's my big push is this is a criminal matter. I'm talking about sexual assault as opposed to harassment, which is different. There's a criminal matter. It should be handled by the police and the courts. And we've actually got our education minister to give advice to the universities to say that. And they're deliberately ignoring it. And most of their regulation, so some of the universities have on their regulations that firstly, everything should go to the police and the courts. And that should be that they're not going to investigate until that process has been gone through. But sometimes the girl doesn't want to do that, the student doesn't want that to happen. And even then, interestingly, the students, the regulations leave a little loophole that once that criminal process is over, they are allowed to have a second go. Ours
is like that.
Yeah, so that you don't manage to, so that say the criminal case doesn't lead, he isn't convicted, there's no conviction, it falls in a heap. The universities can have another go because they've got a lower standard of proof. We've called it here it's the lowest standard, which is the balance of probabilities. And so that they might nail him through that. I mean, it's just
well, we've had that happen. We had a student and found not guilty on 4 counts of assault through a criminal trial, and he went back, and I'll tell you, it was Yale, which is a incestuous bed of nightmarishness, where the school paper had the headline "not guilty." And there were 78,000 signatures to expel him, and eventually he was. I mean, it was just,
wow. Even though he'd
yeah,
been exonerated in the criminal court.
right. And the jury found her not credible, but that didn't matter.
Yeah. I noticed one of your advice from parents says expect your student to become depressed, despondent, and possibly suicidal. Which, I mean, you must have you had situations like that of students
Yes.
committing suicide?
Well, we know of a couple. We know, well, there's that one that there's a lawsuit, Thomas Clockey. I think that was the one in Texas where the girl accused him. He was so despondent he jumped out the window. But the girl later retracted and apologized. It's like,
oh
oh,
God.
God, you have to live with this for the rest of your life. But at least she realized. I mean, a lot of these girls, construct this narrative in their head where they convince themselves, and about memory and how it can be distorted. So, of course, they have to justify their behavior or they can't live with themselves.
Yeah. I mean, because I imagine there are quite a few girls who do things, young women who do things on the spur of the moment. They're angry with him because he didn't want, they thought it was going to lead on to a wonderful relationship, and turned out he just wanted to say, all that usual stuff that goes on between boys and girls, young men and women. And then they make this accusation, and then I imagine there are quite a few who might regret it, or who didn't expect it to have the sort of outcome it does, and must be very difficult. I would imagine for many of the women as well in this situation. They get caught up with friends lobbying them to take action that they didn't really mean to get involved in, and so on. Now,
that happens a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Face is what it has. So you're a major player now in amongst these other organisations trying to get change to the Title IX process. As Australians, I think who are listening to this should know. Tell us about Title IX and what that actually means, and how that is involved with this whole what happened in America in terms of setting up these tribunals. I don't know that people necessarily know that term in Australia.
It was kind of a slow process of expansion. It started off in 1972 when the statute was passed, and of course that was focused more on equal opportunities in education and athletics. And then slowly in the early 80s, they began to say that sexual harassment, but quid pro quo by a teacher of a student, was actionable as discrimination, which, okay, if you want to accept the fact that sexual harassment is sex discrimination, the teacher-student thing makes a little bit of, sense because of the difference in power. Slowly segued into, peer-and-peer sexual assaults are covered, although they at first called it harassment. And then in 1989 and 1999, there were two very important Supreme Court decisions that basically said that schools had to deal with it because it was sexual harassment was within the definition of sex discrimination for the purposes of Title IX, which is a problem for us. But it's an interesting, I would love to read for you this one, if I can find it. Oh, here. So the famous case is Davis versus Monroe County Board of Education, written by the Supreme Court by Justice Sandra O'Connor, the female. But there was a dissent from which I only read last year, and I probably should have read before that, but by Justice Kennedy, in which he said, and it was joined by a few other justices, in which he said that the majority had basically built a fence of little sticks, and it couldn't contain the liability they were setting in motion. That they were actually, the ambiguities and scarce resources will be diverted from our kids. I'm paraphrasing, but the only certainty flowing from the majority's decision is that the scarce resources will be diverted. The ambiguities of the court's interpretation will allow judges, juries, and administrators to expand federal regulations transforming Title IX into a federal student civility code.
Yeah.
And justifying cores of federal administrators in writing regulations on student harassment. School districts will be so desperate to avoid Title IX peer harassment that they will adopt whatever code the student contact the Department of Education sees fit to impose. And basically, he said it clears the way for the federal government to claim center stage in education.
Yeah.
That is incredible to me that in 1999,
Yeah.
Justice Kennedy predicted exactly what has happened here.
Yeah. Now, I did a video just recently, or a chat with Janice Fiamengo, who's an advocate for men from Canada, about the proposed Title IX changes that Betsy DeVos had introduced, and both of us were horrified. We were expecting much more significant changes. I know you've seen that discussion we had, I assume. Cynthia, I gather you're a bit more positive about what was being proposed, not that it'll necessarily get through. Anyway, tell us all about that.
Well, unfortunately, we're stuck with the Supreme Court telling schools they have to deal with this.
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, because it shouldn't be that way. I don't think, or, you know, like you said, a lot of these should go to criminal courts, but, you know, a lot of them aren't even criminal, which is why they needed this ulterior, this other source of disciplinary process. But I think what's happened is we've ended up with these so contorted procedures designed to find students guilty and make it easy to find students guilty, that the only way we can address it is by creating these specific procedures that indicate how to reach an accurate decision.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are criticizing the regs for being too specific, but, you know, apparently the schools need it because we have those, almost 600 cases where courts have ruled in, or complaints, and then another 200 where courts have ruled in these accused students' favor. So I don't know exactly, I don't remember exactly what it was. I mean, did she think that we should have gone further? You know.
Oh yeah,
I'm not sure we're even going to get this through. So
I know you've said that. I mean, she and I both were really disappointed that that so many impediments remain to proper justice for the accused. I mean, you know, and that the Betsy DeVos talk, the speech she gave introducing it, was absolutely kowtowing to the feminists, and, you know, really almost promoting the believe the victim justice. It said nothing about false accusations, even though people like you had been in, that you went in and did you see Betsy DeVos?
Yeah,
I know you brought people who had been falsely accused in to meet her. She knows the truth about what's going on.
She definitely knows. Yeah.
And
don't you think that was a political decision?
Oh, of course.
Because those feminist agencies, those victims advocates get billions of dollars in funding from our own government that we don't get. Yeah. And so they're very powerful. There are millions of them, and they don't care about becoming public, unlike our students who are terrified.
I know.
So
look, I know. I'm a total optimist. I keep thinking, oh, we're going to get some change here, and you know, it's sad it doesn't happen. I noticed on your website a letter to Joe Biden about his situation. Tell us. I love that. Tell me what that was all about.
Well, we're terrified if he gets elected, and you know, not that I'm fanning Trump's flame right now, but you know, we're terrified that he's going to get elected because he's promised to reinstate the Dear Colleague letter. I mean, he's made that promise, and it's like the man.
And he was one of the people. Sorry, I was going to say he was one of the people who really pushed for this whole process to get set in SMID, and he's made numerous statements, appalling statements about you know, assumptions of denying the assumption of innocence in the accused. I mean, all the things. He just blatantly promotes believe the victim justice, doesn't he?
And how doesn't he see the contrast or the, inconsistency with his own behavior? He doesn't even see his creepy behavior as creepy.
Yeah.
I mean, he really doesn't get it. There's something wrong with that man. Really, there is.
And yet, as you point out in the letter to him, the public letter, that a lot of the behaviour he's accused of and he's known for is precisely the sort of behaviour that is getting young men in trouble on campuses. And
the affirmative consent that he pushed.
Yeah.
Tell me he asked those little girls whose hair he fondled, tried to kiss, and tell me he asked them if he could kiss them or whatever.
Yeah.
No, doesn't he see that? But we didn't want to do it in a way that antagonized him. So it was very carefully worded.
Carefully written, yes.
It was very carefully to try to, try to get at his feelings, at his, I don't know that he even read it, honestly.
No.
Shame.
But you would have thought amongst the Democrats there are people who are uncomfortable about this. You would, Anyway, that was the only. I was trying to think of a positive note for us to end this conversation, Cynthia. And there was that lovely New York Times article, which I'm sure you saw, published in the last few weeks, which quoted a whole bunch of law professors, amongst other people, advocating for the Title IX changes and saying we need to do something about due process on campus. And so that was something. I mean, and the fact that the New York Times published that gave me a little slither of hope.
Yeah. Well, do you know, every article that comes out on this issue, I read the comments. And in every case, the majority of the comments have been in support of the regulations. Believe it or not, their readers support them. They may hate Betsy DeVos. They say that. I don't like her. I don't like anything else she's done, but she's right on this. I mean, over and over and over, they say that. So that gives me some hope, except that the fact that, the 4 lawsuits now that have been filed against the regs are by state attorneys general, the ACLU, and New York.
So these are lawsuits arguing that the changes that Betsy DeVos has, what's the word? Is it you legislate them? I don't know how to.
No, they're regulations issued under the statute.
Yeah, regulations that they're trying to get through. I mean, so we have big organizations arguing this shouldn't happen already.
Oh, they're having fits. Oh my God, COVID. How could you do this during COVID? I'm thinking you don't have anything better to do than, what are your Title IX people doing? And also, they're saying, it's in excess of the department's authority. And I'm thinking, you've been prescribing procedures that hurt respondents for how many years now?
Yeah.
Telling schools not to let the due process of the respondent interfere with the rights of the complainant.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, I know. It's just extraordinary who lines up on the other side on this issue. And hardly anybody dares to say what ordinary people are saying. I mean, I think that's true here in Australia, that lots of people know what's happening on campuses. I get letters all the time supporting what I've been doing. People are very concerned about it. I hear from lawyers a lot who are worried about it, and yet so few people dare go public on this issue. It's very scary. We're actually quite positive about Corona, about COVID having, helping our situation in Australia, because the universities have been really badly hit financially by the loss of overseas students. A lot of our students came from China, and there will be real changes in, how many overseas students are going to be allowed into Australia, particularly in the short term. And of course, China is arguing strongly that no, because we've been misbehaving as a country and calling out some of China's actions in relation to Corona, we're being punished, and they're saying students shouldn't come here and study. So the universities are losing a fortune now, And it's a very good time for the universities to rethink whether they need to be involved in this territory, particularly as our education minister is saying. And we've had a big court case I mentioned to you, Cynthia, that said that universities shouldn't be adjudicating rape. Once again, I'm distinguishing between sexual assault and sexual harassment, which in Australia we have a Human Rights Commission that determines matters of sexual harassment, and that's where some of these cases should be going. But the criminal courts have the legislation in place to deal with these matters, and they should be dealing with it instead of our cash-strapped universities now. And so I've got some of my people to write to the governing boards of our universities across Australia to point this out, to say the universities are still keep sticking to their regulations and proposing to pursue this ill-advised course, when there's every reason now, as people on a governing board, for you to argue that the university should get out of this territory. So we're hoping we could gradually persuade people that this is not a good idea in Australia. But you've got a much more difficult situation, because the Title IX provisions require universities to adjudicate these matters, don't they?
As interpreted by our Supreme Court, yes.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And the internal pressure from the professors that lean that way and the students is huge. So I think there's, the schools are worried about that as well.
Yeah. And because the whole narrative is about rape victims, protecting women need a safe place, and there's never any public discussion on the campuses about the rights of the accused. No. That's always left out of the equation, isn't it?
Yeah, unless you're Harvard.
Where are the mothers? This is why aren't parents who've got young people going to university concerned about it? Never occurs to them this could happen to their son.
That's exactly. Exactly. It never occurs to them that
my son's a good boy. Nothing would ever.
And they are for the most part.
I know. He would never do anything like that.
I don't have to worry about that. That kid must have done something. Yeah. That's what they think. And I thought at one point, I thought that I would know if a student was, or assume that if a student was accused, they did something. I just would have assumed that something.
I know. It's just tragic. Anyway, so it's been lovely to talk to you. I hope people have enjoyed our discussion, which was wandered around a range of territory. And I'll be very fun. I'll keep a great interest in your activities and in FACE, which is a great asset, I think, particularly for Americans, but also for Australian parents who might be interested in this issue, to have a look at the information you've got up there, giving advice from parents to other parents to students about how to deal with these issues, and it will make your hair stand on end. It really does. It's absolutely chilling to hear what an accused student is up against, and parents need to know this.
And students and parents contributed to those advice. I mean, they really did. They said, well, no, you have to say this. Students, were very specific about what the potential accused students needed to hear. Yeah. So,
well, look, we're all responsible. I mean, I always feel that we allow this to happen. We allowed the feminists to take over our universities. We allowed the feminists to bully bureaucrats into setting up all these regulations. And now it's up to us to do something about it.
I wonder if we could have done anything. I mean, there's such a force.
But
they're not my feminists.
All right. So my point is always, I think there's no question the sensible majority, the silent majority, believes in justice, believes in fair treatment for males and females. There are just as many parents out there who have sons as they do daughters. And if you went out and really canvassed people, the majority would be behind us. And
I think even a new study came out by Fairleigh Dickinson, which had polled students who believe in those rights. Oh, I want to, I don't know if we have a minute, but I wanted to tell you, there is this really interesting article that was in Playboy last year about a professor who was teaching about Title IX. It was her subject. And she decided, and her kids were, debating Title IX, the regs, and she decided to give them a survey. So she gave them a survey about the different provisions of the regs, and without knowing it, the majority of them agreed with the regs until they found out those were the regs.
Yeah, these are the changes you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I just think there's no question about that. And luckily, and that would include lots of young women who believe in justice. But anyway, this is a call for action, people. I hope hope that you will find. I mean, I'm sure FACE could do with some more supporters and people helping.
Oh, definitely.
And certainly I could do with a lot more support in terms of people helping me with my campus battle. Cynthia, thanks very much. And I hope we'll be able to talk to you again.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. It's been fun.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks everybody for supporting me on my YouTube channel. I've got growing numbers of subscribers, which is really exciting. If you'd like to support me financially, go to my donate page on my website. Thanks a lot.